When people imagine medieval prison, they usually picture a dungeon beneath a castle, a stone chamber, a rusty chain, a prisoner sitting in darkness. And while that image is not completely wrong, it does not tell the full story. Because in the Middle Ages, prison was often not the final punishment. It was the place where people waited for something worse. A poor thief might wait for whipping, a debtor might wait for payment that would never come, a captured knight might wait for ransom, a rebel might wait for torture, a political enemy might wait for years in silence, and a condemned prisoner might wait for the door to open one final time, knowing that a crowd was already gathering outside. Medieval prison was not built around rehabilitation. It was not meant to help a person return to society. In many cases, prison was a tool of control. It held people until they could be tried, punished, ransomed, humiliated, exchanged, tortured, or executed. And that is what made it so terrifying. You were not always imprisoned because the prison itself was the sentence. You were imprisoned because someone more powerful had not yet decided what to do with you. To understand why medieval prison could be worse than death, we need to understand three things: who was locked inside, where they were kept, and what their captors wanted from them. Because in the medieval world, your suffering depended on your value, and your value depended on your rank. Medieval justice was not equal. It was shaped by wealth, land, reputation, religion, military power, and personal relationships. The law did not treat every person the same way. A nobleman accused of treason might be kept alive because he was politically useful. A captured knight might be guarded carefully because he could bring ransom money. A wealthy merchant might be able to pay for better treatment. But a poor peasant accused of theft might be beaten, starved, or forgotten. A servant accused by a master might have almost no one to defend them. A stranger arrested in a town might have no family nearby, no money, and no protection. In medieval prison, your rank followed you into the cell. The walls did not make everyone equal. They revealed the hierarchy even more clearly. The rich could sometimes buy comfort, the powerful could negotiate, the valuable could be traded, the poor could disappear. That is why medieval prison was not one experience. It was many different experiences depending on who you were. The first group was the poor and powerless. These were peasants, thieves, debtors, servants, local criminals, beggars, and people accused by someone with more authority than they had. They usually faced the worst conditions. They often had little money to pay for food, bedding, or better treatment. They had fewer people who could speak for them. And their suffering was rarely recorded. If a noble prisoner grew sick, people might notice. If a poor prisoner died in a filthy cell, the world might simply move on. For the poor, prison could become a slow form of abandonment. They might be locked in a town prison, a castle room, a cellar, or a gatehouse cell while waiting for a trial or punishment. But waiting did not mean safety. It meant hunger, cold, filth, uncertainty, and the constant fear that whatever came next would be worse. A poor prisoner was also useful as a warning. Medieval punishment was often public, and ordinary criminals could be turned into examples. A thief did not only suffer for the crime, they could be displayed so others would fear the law. A person locked away today might be dragged into the street tomorrow, not for privacy, not for justice as we understand it, but for spectacle. The second group was the valuable. These were knights, nobles, wealthy merchants, captured commanders, and important hostages. Their prison experience could be very different. Some noble prisoners had better food, better rooms, letters, visitors, servants, even negotiations. But this was not mercy, it was business. A captured noble could be worth more alive than dead. In medieval warfare, taking the right prisoner could bring a fortune. A knight could be ransomed. A lord could be exchanged. A hostage could guarantee loyalty. A wealthy captive could become a bargaining chip. His body became a living banknote. But comfort did not mean freedom. A noble prisoner might sleep in a decent room, but the door was still locked. He might eat better food, but he could not leave. He might write letters, but only because his captors wanted payment. His future depended on other people. Would his family pay? Would his allies negotiate? Would his captor keep his word? Would the political situation change before his release? For the noble, prison could be comfortable on the outside and terrifying on the inside, because every day reminded him that his life had become a price. The third group was the dangerous. These were rebels, traitors, rival heirs, captured leaders, religious enemies, disloyal nobles. and anyone whose existence threatened someone in power. These prisoners were not always held because of ordinary crime. They were held because they were inconvenient. Sometimes killing such a person openly could create problems. It could start a rebellion, create a martyr, anger an important family, or make a ruler look cruel. So imprisonment became a quieter weapon. A dangerous person could be hidden away, silenced, pressured, forgotten, kept alive, but removed from the world. This kind of prison could be one of the darkest forms of medieval punishment, not because it was always the bloodiest, but because it could erase a person slowly. A rival heir locked in a tower could no longer gather supporters. A defeated rebel kept behind walls could no longer lead an army. A political enemy held in silence could become a rumor instead of a threat. A living prisoner could be more useful than a dead one, and that made prison a tool of power. Not every medieval prison was a dramatic underground dungeon. That image is famous, but the reality was broader. Prisoners could be held in castle towers, gatehouse cells, underground chambers, town prisons, strong rooms, cellars, cages, pits, or temporary holding rooms near courts and fortifications. The purpose was simple: do not let them escape. Comfort was not the goal, safety was not the goal. A castle did not need a modern prison block. It only needed a room you could not leave, a heavy wooden door, an iron lock, a narrow window, a guard outside, a chain fixed to the wall. That was enough. Some prisoners were kept above ground in towers. These rooms could be cold, windy, and difficult to escape. Others were placed near gatehouses, where guards already controlled movement in and out of the castle. Some were kept below ground, in damp chambers where light barely reached. Others were held in pits or cellars that were never designed for human life. The walls were stone, the floors were cold, the air was damp, the straw was often dirty, and the sound of the outside world could be just close enough to remind you that life continued without you. A prisoner might hear footsteps overhead, a door closing, a guard laughing, a horse in the courtyard, a bell in the distance. But none of those sounds meant freedom. They only proved that the world was still moving while the prisoner remained trapped. Daily life inside the cell was its own punishment, and it can be understood through different kinds of suffering. The first was cold and damp. Stone was strong, but it held moisture. In winter, a prison cell could become bitterly cold. A prisoner might sleep on straw, a rough blanket, or the bare floor. If the straw became wet, it could rot. If the walls sweated with moisture, the room could feel like it was slowly draining heat from the body. A healthy person could weaken quickly in those conditions. A sick person might never recover. The second suffering was hunger. Food was not always guaranteed in the way people might assume. In some places, prisoners or their families had to pay for better food, bedding, or treatment. If you had money, you might survive better. If you had family nearby, they might bring food. If someone cared about your release, they might pay the fees. But if you had nothing, prison became far more dangerous. You might receive bread, water, thin ale, scraps, or not enough to keep you strong. Hunger changed everything. It made the body weak. It made the mind desperate. It made sickness more likely. And for a poor prisoner, hunger could become a sentence before the trial ever came. The third suffering was filth and disease. Medieval prisons were not clean places. Waste buckets might not be emptied often. Cells could smell of sweat, urine, rot, sickness, and old straw. Lice, fleas, rats, and insects could spread quickly. Dirty clothing could not be properly washed. A cut could become infected. A fever could move through a crowded room. A cough could become deadly. There were no modern antibiotics, no proper sanitation, no real medical care for most prisoners. A person could enter prison accused of a minor crime and leave, if they left at all, with a body permanently damaged by illness. The fourth suffering was darkness and time. Some cells had small windows, others had almost none. Underground chambers could blur day and night together. There were no clocks, no schedules the prisoner controlled, no way to measure time except meals, footsteps, prayers, or the changing cold. This could damage the mind. A person alone in darkness begins to listen too closely. Every sound becomes important, a key turning, a guard approaching, another prisoner crying, chains moving in the dark. Time stretches when there is nothing to do but wait, and waiting was at the center of medieval prison, waiting for trial, waiting for ransom, waiting for punishment, waiting for a confession to be forced, waiting for a door to open. The fifth suffering was dependence. A prisoner depended on the jailer for almost everything: food, water, light, movement, messages, permission to see family, permission to improve conditions, sometimes even survival. A fair jailer could make imprisonment more bearable. A cruel or corrupt jailer could make it unbearable. A prisoner with money might pay for small comforts. A prisoner without money had little power. That dependence was part of the terror. The prisoner's life could rest in the hands of a person who saw them as a burden, a source of profit, or an enemy. And this is one of the most important truths about medieval prison. The prison did not need constant torture to break someone. The conditions themselves could do it slowly. Cold could weaken the body. Hunger could hollow it out. Disease could spread through the cell. Darkness could wear down the mind. Dependence could destroy dignity. But for some prisoners, the suffering became more direct. Because medieval imprisonment was often connected to torture and interrogation, not every prisoner was tortured. Torture varied by place, period, law, and circumstance, but the threat of torture was part of the fear. A prisoner might not know if they were being held for questioning, confession, punishment, or death, and that uncertainty could be terrifying. Torture could serve several purposes. The first was confession. Authorities might use pain, restraint, or fear to force someone to admit guilt. In a world where confession carried enormous weight, forcing one could become a powerful tool. The second purpose was information. A prisoner might be pressured to reveal names, plans, locations, allies, hidden money, secret messages, or political plots. This was especially true in cases involving rebellion, treason, war, or conspiracy. The third purpose was punishment. Pain could be used to punish disobedience, rebellion, theft, betrayal, or defiance. The fourth purpose was terror. Sometimes the threat mattered as much as the act. A prisoner might hear screams from another room, see another captive returned injured, notice the tools prepared nearby, hear guards speak about what might happen next. The imagination could do the rest. Methods varied, but they could include whipping, restraint, shackles, stress positions, starvation, sleep deprivation, branding, mutilation, threats of execution, or forcing prisoners to hear or witness the suffering of others. The point was not always immediate death. Often the point was control, to make the prisoner speak, submit, confess, name others, or break. And sometimes the waiting was worse than the act itself. A prisoner facing execution knew the end was coming. A prisoner waiting for torture lived in dread of the next footstep outside the door. Medieval punishment was also often public. This is another reason prison was so frightening. The cell could be only the backstage area before public suffering. A prisoner might be held in darkness, then brought into daylight not for freedom but for humiliation. Stocks, pillories, whipping posts, branding, mutilation, public confession, public execution. These punishments were meant to be seen. Medieval authority relied on spectacle. Punishment did not only hurt the prisoner, it warned the crowd. It taught people what happened to those who stole, rebelled, lied, disobeyed, or challenged power. The prisoner became a message, and for many people, public shame could destroy a life even if the body survived. Medieval communities were small. Reputation mattered. Family name mattered. Trust mattered. A person who was publicly punished might lose work, lose marriage prospects, lose neighbors' respect, bring shame on their family, be remembered forever for one accusation, one punishment, or one moment of disgrace. In that sense, prison could lead to a second kind of death, a social death. A person might survive the cell, survive the whipping, survive the public shame, but return to a world that no longer had a place for them. For the poor and powerless, this could be devastating. They had few resources to begin again. Their name might be ruined. Their family might suffer with them. Their future could be narrowed by a punishment that everyone had witnessed. This was one of the cruelest parts of medieval justice. Punishment did not always end when the chains came off. Sometimes it followed the prisoner home, but for nobles, prison worked differently. A captured noble might not be dragged through the street or left in the filth with common prisoners. He might receive a private chamber, better food, visitors, servants, letters, and negotiations. Some noble prisoners were treated with a level of respect that seems strange compared to the conditions faced by ordinary people. But again, this was not kindness, it was value. A noble prisoner could be worth a fortune. In medieval warfare, ransom was a major part of conflict. Capturing an enemy of high rank could be more profitable than killing him. A knight might be held until his family paid, a lord might be used in negotiations, a captured commander might be exchanged for another prisoner, an important hostage might secure the behavior of an entire family or region. But this kind of prison came with its own terror, because the prisoner's freedom depended on others. If payment came quickly, captivity might be short. If payment was delayed, it could last months. If the ransom was too high, it could take years. And if politics changed, the prisoner's value could change with it. A nobleman who was useful today could become dangerous tomorrow. A hostage who seemed protected could suddenly become disposable. A prisoner might write letters begging for money, help, or negotiation, but behind every letter was the same fear. What if no one pays? What if they cannot raise the ransom? What if my captor decides I am worth more dead? For nobles, prison could be a negotiation, but a negotiation with your body locked behind the door. Then there were political prisoners, the ones who had to disappear. These prisoners make the story darker because their captivity was not always about a specific crime, it was about power. A rival heir could threaten a ruler's claim. A defeated rebel could inspire another uprising. A disloyal noble could gather supporters. A religious opponent could challenge authority. A captured leader could become a symbol if killed publicly. So imprisonment offered a solution. Do not kill them in the open. Do not give them a stage. Do not create a martyr. Simply remove them. A political prisoner could be held in a tower, castle, fortress, or distant stronghold. They might be watched carefully. Their communication could be controlled. Their visitors could be limited. Their name could fade from public life. And over time, their absence could become useful. The ruler outside the cell could continue ruling. The prisoner inside could become a memory. This is why political imprisonment could be worse than ordinary punishment, because it was not always about what you had done, it was about what you represented, your bloodline, your claim, your followers, your ideas, your existence. A person could be imprisoned not because they were powerless, but because they were too dangerous to leave free, and sometimes too dangerous to kill. The most terrifying medieval prison was not always the one with the most blood. Sometimes it was the one where no one heard from you again, where your enemies did not need to defeat you every day, they only needed to keep the door locked. For some prisoners, the final stage was execution, and prison was the road leading toward it. A condemned prisoner might spend their final hours in a cell, knowing what was coming. The night before execution must have been almost impossible to endure. They might hear movement outside, preparations, voices, the building of a scaffold, the gathering of guards, the ordinary sounds of a town preparing to watch someone die. Medieval execution was often public. It was not only about ending a life, it was about displaying power. A ruler, court, or local authority wanted people to see that punishment had been carried out. The body of the condemned became proof that the law, the Lord, or the crown had control. For the prisoner, this meant death was not private. It was witnessed. It was remembered. It was used. That is the disturbing truth at the heart of this story. Execution ended the body. Prison could take everything else first: time, strength, health, dignity, reputation, hope. A person could spend weeks, months, or years losing pieces of themselves before the final punishment ever arrived. The poor could be abandoned. The valuable could be priced. The dangerous could be erased. The condemned could be made to wait. And all of them lived under the control of someone outside the cell. That was the true horror. A medieval prisoner did not control the next hour. They did not control their food, their water, their light, their movement, their safety, their reputation, their future. Everything depended on the lord, jailer, judge, captor, king, enemy, or official who held power over them. And medieval power could be brutal, it could be personal, it could be corrupt, it could be careless, it could be slow. That is why medieval prison was worse than death for so many people. Not because every prisoner died there, not because every prisoner was tortured, not because every cell looked like the dungeons from legend, but because prison could take away everything that made life human before death ever arrived. It could take away comfort through cold, health through disease, strength through hunger, peace through fear, identity through shame, freedom through stone, and hope through waiting. So the next time you see a medieval castle, do not only imagine the great hall, the banners, the knights, and the feast. Look lower. Look behind the gatehouse, inside the tower, beneath the stone steps, beyond the locked wooden door. There in the darkness was another side of medieval life, not the world of kings and songs, but the world of prisoners, people listening for footsteps, people counting days they could not see. People waiting for ransom that might never come. People fearing torture. People preparing for shame. People wondering if the next time the door opened, it would mean freedom, punishment, or death. For the poor, prison could mean being forgotten. For the noble, it could mean being bought and sold. For the rebel, it could mean being broken. For the political enemy, it could mean being erased. For the condemned, it could mean waiting for the crowd. And after weeks, months, or years behind stone walls, death may not have seemed like the punishment anymore. It may have seemed like release. That is why medieval prison was worse than death.